Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Today we're going to be discussing reverse tells. Actually, I haven't streamed on GoToWebinar in a while. If this thing's working, please let me know. If it's not working, well, we're going to have to do something different. We played online poker all day yesterday till about 4 a.m. That was a long day. It was fun. We almost did great. I think we won $12,000, $11,000, something like that at the end of the day. We won 3 $2,500 buy-in seats and random small stake satellites. That was good. We won a $50 tournament in the middle of the day for $3,500, and I think we took 5th place, 6th place, something like that, in a $600 tournament at the end of the day for I think $7,000 or $8,000. So, solid day. Could have been better. I check raised all in with a draw on the turn. People keep asking, why would you possibly do that? Because I thought it was good. And it didn't work out. He had the top pair top kicker. When he has top pair top kicker, it's not going to get through. And that's okay. They wouldn't have asked you that if it won, yeah. There were a few spots where, like one time, button with loose stats raised, and I had like 20 big blinds, I think. Or no, maybe he had 20 big blinds. I had Jack 5 suited in the small blind. I ripped it all in. He folded. If it would have got called, it would have been, why would you jam the Jack 5 suited? Because it was good. Roberto says we had sushi. It looked good. Yeah, it was good. So at the beginning of the day, it's a bit of a secret, but James Romero texted me, and we had a call about good exploits he's been finding based on player pool tendencies, and one of them was just bluff the river every time you have the opportunity. So I told everyone at the beginning of the stream, I'm going to bluff literally every river that I have the opportunity. Now, that means in spots where I am the aggressor or I am checked too. If the opponent's the aggressor and they bet the river, I'm not just going to raise them blindly, obviously, because their range should be strong. So in spots where the opponent's range should not just be very, very polarized or nut heavy, we're going to bluff every river. I bluffed literally 80% of the rivers I could yesterday, within reason. We got a big check raise all in through. That was a lot of fun. I think we had 10 high. We decided to check raise the river as the bluff. It got through. Maybe we need to be check raising all in more on the river. I'm not sure. But we took every single river spot. And what it essentially amounts to is your river bluffs need to get through, 33% of the time, 40% of the time, 50% of the time, etc. And they're going to get through something like 40 or 50 or 60% of the time. So a little bit more than is required. You're not going to be printing all the equity, but you are printing a lot of equity. If something needs to happen 33%, but it's actually going to happen 40% or 50%, you're going to demolish them. Is the opponent's river checking range weak on the river? Well, all the ranges are weak on the river is what it amounts to. People don't like check calling reasonably sized bets on the river. And whenever we are bluffing a river, we're betting, 65% pot, over pot. I actually, from my own data, not that my own data is the end all be all or anything, but I think over bets on the river are really good. Like really, really good. I think those actually print way more than they should. Like they need to succeed 60% of the time. They probably succeed more like 75% of the time or something. Obviously a little bit more risk heavy because when you lose more, but I think they work a little bit more often. Anyway, in reasonable spots where I am checked to on the river, especially when the aggressor, we just went for it every river. I think it worked out. But yeah, nice, good, solid day. We won a tournament, took a 6th place or 7th place or whatever it was in a high stakes tournament. Won 3 satellites. And these were not 10% of the field gets paid satellites. These were like, you got to be in the top few percent of the field. I think one was an $80 game, one was another $80 game, and another one was a $160 game where they paid $2,500 seats. So it's like one in 30, right? So it's basically like kind of winner take all, top heavy stuff. So we crushed them yesterday. It was good. We'll have that stream up for poker coaching members sometime soon. Today, though, you'll have me just rambling for 4 minutes. We're going to discuss reverse tells. This is a question you all asked about. Should you consider using reverse tells to crush your opponents? Weak means strong, and strong means weak, so let's reverse it. Okay. First things first, what does your opponent know? And you have to understand that it is difficult, if not impossible, to know what your opponent knows. Just because you think something or just because you know something does not mean your opponent knows that same thing, right? And even if you know that your opponent thinks something like a particular bet size means weakness, you don't know how they're going to respond to that particular bet size. So understand you don't actually know what your opponents know. So many people think that just because they think something, or just because they've studied something, their opponents know all of that same thing. We watched this just yesterday. Yeah, when we were playing deep in this satellite, I think 2 places got paid and we were down to 3 people. I was out of position against the other big stack. I think I had like 50 big blinds. My opponent had 50 big blinds on my left, and then another guy had like 12 big blinds. That's the spot where the guy on my left should just be leaning hard on me. Instead, he was nitty. If he was leaning hard on me back like he should have been, I could not have played nearly as many hands as I did. But I realized this guy's not very good, and I am going to give my best chance, myself a best chance to lock up a seat, which means playing these pots out of position and still, doing okay. But if he was just leaning on me, I would not have been able to do that because there's huge ICM pressure on me in that spot. Because if 2 people get paid and one guy has 15 big blinds and everybody else has 50, then I would have to have been very tight, which is going to result in my opponent getting a seat basically every time, the guy with 50 big blinds. And then me and the guy with 15 big blinds chopping up the other seat. Instead, essentially, I got to chop up the other seat I got the seat locked up, and the opponent chopped up that 15 big blind seat, whether or not he realized it. So just because you think something, just because you know something, does not mean that your opponent knows the same thing. So let's talk about some common tells. Now, again, these are very generic. I think the general player pool knows most of these, okay? So I think in general, heavy breathing means excitement. You're usually excited when you have a good hand. When you have nothing, you're not excited, you are terrified. Excitement and what's the word for terrified? Terrification? No, being terrified are similar but different. If you're terrified, usually you don't breathe. You try to curl up in a ball. If you're excited, you're usually breathing heavy. That's usually when you have a good hand. So if heavy breathing means strength, then it makes logical sense to breathe heavily when you're bluffing. Sure. However, if your opponent sees you breathing heavily, how much will they actually adjust? A little bit? A lot? Will they fold everything besides the nuts? Will they call a little bit tighter than normal? Will they not even care? What about if they think breathing heavy actually indicates weakness? You don't know what the opponent will perceive. You just have no idea of knowing. Some people will think it's an obvious reverse tell, and they'll do the bottom option here, where they're going to think that heavy breathing indicates pure weakness. Some people are just going to fold everything because they're going to see your play. Let's see, how do I move this? They're going to see your play and think this guy must have the nuts, or they're going to think this guy's bluffing. You don't know. You just don't know. It's important to know that you don't know. Some of you here in the inner circle have this problem where you think you know definitively what your opponents are going to do. Hate to break it to you, you just don't. You don't. You may think you do, but you don't. And you may have an inclination, which I think is definitely possible. So let's say you do think your opponent's going to fold everything besides the nuts 55% or call with everything 45%. So they're slightly pushed towards calling with the nuts. 55-45 instead of 50-50. Obviously it's not 50-50. I know how the game works. But say it's 55-45. Well, now maybe that should be enough to adjust your strategy. I'm not sure. Depends on the spot. But understand you don't really know what the opponents are doing, and just because you think something does not mean they're going to think something. So the big problem with reverse tells. Once your opponent knows that you're capable of reversing a tell, if they have any common sense whatsoever, they're going to just straight up ignore all tells that you demonstrate. So if you're transparent, they're going to ignore all the tells initially once they see you reverse a tell. And then if you are transparent, meaning that you always use the reverse tell when you are wanting the opposite reaction, your opponents are going to realize that. Like, let's say you always breathe heavily when you're bluffing because you think that looks strong. I've seen this happen all the time in marginal pros, like a lot. So if you breathe heavily every time you are bluffing, well, now doesn't that just become a regular tell, right? So the problem with reverse tells is that it may work the first time. It's definitely not going to work the first time, but it may work the first time. And after the first time, it could very easily become a very, very, very costly leak because let's say you breathe heavily every time you're bluffing and your opponent observes this 2 or 3 or 4 times. Well, now, normally when people are breathing heavy, they have the nuts, but not you. When you breathe heavy, you're bluffing. You may say, well, then I can reverse it on them. Maybe. Sure. Who knows? Maybe they're not even paying attention. Now, if you're breathing heavy and they call you down with the king high and it's good, all right, they're probably adjusting pretty hard. So maybe you can reverse it to that point. But even then, maybe they realize, all right, I call this guy with king high. He'd be an absolute idiot to breathe heavy and then bluff again. So now I'm waiting for him. And when he's breathe heavy next time, he's going to have the nuts. Who knows what level they're on? That's the thing, is you don't know what level they're on. People love leveling wars. Back in the day, every single show, you would hear Daniel Legrand saying, oh, I'm on this level and he's on this level and they're on this level. Thinking, I'm doing this, they're going to do this because I'm doing this, I'm doing this because he's doing this and he's doing this, etc., etc. And it's all nonsense. It's all absolute nonsense. You do not have to engage in leveling wars. Just play good, fundamentally sound poker. And if you see someone doing something horribly wrong, adjust. But usually, even if you do see someone breathing heavy, sometimes when they have the nuts, you don't know when it's happening, you don't know it's definitive, etc., etc. Mark says, our ability to estimate what our opponents are thinking to do seems to be a limiting factor, and you've always felt like you're terrible at that. Fine, play good, fundamentally sound poker, and then you'll be A-okay. That's the great thing about what I'm teaching you here, is that you don't have to even know what your opponents are doing. They can be playing a strategy that you are oblivious to, and you're still going to win. There's a lot of value in just playing good, fundamentally sound poker. Some players have visibly increased pulses, which is much more reliable. Yeah, so things like pulse rate, some things like, well, breathing is semi-subconscious for most people. Some things like the way they put the chips in the pot, etc., etc. There are a lot of things that people do subconsciously. The more subconscious a thing is, like pupil dilation or pulse rate, these things are going to be more reliable than things that are controllable, like, well, breathing rates, the way you put chips in the pot, etc. But I think they all are somewhat reliable. The interesting thing in general is that things that are subconscious are usually harder to see, like pupil dilation, or even pulse on the neck, right? It's hard to see in some people. So you're going to find, I think, in general that, yeah, more subconscious things are more reliable. But again, you need a big sample because, I'll tell you all an interesting story for me. Normally I get excited. Jonathan Little gets excited in all pots when he plays against someone he immensely respects, which doesn't happen all that often. When I say respect, I don't mean who I think's a nit. I mean who I think is world class. I think the last time this happened was about 8 years ago. I was at the LAPC, and I was playing against Phil Ivey, and I had 4 of a kind, and my pulse was going crazy. Anyway, he ended up folding, and I didn't get paid. However, a month before that, I was in Cyprus, and I was playing against Patrick Antonius. 2 guys, they're like the heroes of the poker world back in the day. Both instances, my pulse was going nuts. The instance against Antonius, I had the nut low and was bluffing. Pulse was going nuts. Against Ivy, I had the stone nuts. My pulse was going nuts. Now, you may look at those instances and say, why is his pulse going nuts? One time he has the nuts, one time he has the nut low. It has literally nothing to do with my hand. It has to do with my opponent. It's straight up who I was playing against back in the day. And, nowadays I don't think my pulse gets going much at all. But back then, I was excited, right? And, rightfully so. You're playing against the people who are literally the kings of the poker world. And with the nuts, I was just excited. You're excited to play with these people. And it had nothing to do with my hand strength. I was still willing to make the bluffs I thought were good. I'm not trying to bluff Antonius because I want to pull a big bluff on him, right? I'm bluffing Antonius because it was the obvious right play. Sometimes it's just obviously the right play, and you have to do it. And if either of the opponents adjusted because they thought something about that tell, both of them would have been wrong. My pulse was going nuts purely because they were them, not because of my hand strength in any way whatsoever. And that very easily could be the case. Some people get excited when they have draws. Some people excited when they have specifically gut shot draws. Some people get excited when they have the nuts. You don't know what's going on. And you must realize you do not know what is going on. So, reverse tells have lots of problems. Let's see. Let's talk now about using your one time. So, a lot of poker players say, oh, one time. It's not one time. You want things to happen many times. But your one time, I may have won the World Poker Tour Foxwoods because of a reverse tell. So I'm sitting here telling you, don't use reverse tells. Don't use reverse tells. I think I may have actually won a WPT because of a reverse tell. There's a chance this won me a literal $1 million. So how did it happen? In this instance, what exactly happened in this hand? Let me try to recall it. Yeah, okay. I think someone raised, and then a guy named Bill Gaze's good, strong poker player called, like on the button. I get pocket kings in the big blind, and I ripped it all in for, I think, 20-ish big blinds, 25 big blinds. It was like 25 big blinds. It was kind of a big shove. Probably not the optimal play, but I shoved. I was a shove bot back in the day, just jam a lot. If you all watched my stream yesterday, I got the question from multiple people multiple times, why are you all in so often? Is that normal? The answer is yes. You have to be all in when you have short stacks. But anyway, folds around to me, I jam kings. Initial razor folds, get back to Bill Gaze's. He sits there, thinks for a while, gets ready to fold. He's putting his cards in the muck. I take my hand and I put it on my chin. I was sitting there stoic, both hands on the table as I always do. I took my hand and put it on my chin/mouth region to basically cover up the mouth. There is this well-known tell written about by Mike Caro, written about by Joe Navarro. Back in the day, these were two people who had reasonable books on tells. When people cover their mouth, they're bluffing. Every player has read these books, and they all know when people cover their mouth, they're bluffing. They have to be bluffing, right? So in this spot, I decided to use my one time against Bill Gaze's. It's never going to work again against Bill Gaze's, but maybe it will. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I'm not sure. But I decided to use the one time. I covered the mouth. I took my hand and covered the mouth. And in this exact instance, like everything combined to just make this the right spot. My opponent was a strong player. You know, well, at least definitely good enough. I don't know if he's world class or anything, but I've seen him on TV a bunch. He seemed to play reasonably. Good tag, right? Also, he did not know me, I don't think. I'd already won a WPT, but I don't think he knew me at all. He probably thought I was, good kid. Inexperienced, good kid. That's what you think when you see 23-year-old kid or 22-year-old kid, whatever I was. You think probably good, but inexperienced at live poker. And he was really paying attention. He was zoned in. He was focusing on every single hand that was happening at the table. He was paying attention. So it was the absolute perfect storm. We went for the hand on the chin, or covering the mouth region. He was about to deposit his cards in the muck, took them back, thought for like another 2 minutes, and then made the call. He had ace queen, easy call in my mind, but he had ace queen. I'm telling you, he was going to fold, and instead we got called. Now we could have been out there, of course. We still lose 30% of the time, but we didn't lose, and we got a double up to go from 20 something big blinds to 50 big blinds, and then we won the tournament. So reverse tells are a fun topic for me specifically because I've actually won substantial money, or at least been put in a position to win substantial money because of them a few times. The thing is, when people ask me questions like, should we be using reverse tells? They are asking, should we be using reverse tells all the time? And the answer is obviously no. Reverse tells are best used very sporadically. Very, 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 very sporadically. I'm talking like once every week or something. Maybe you can get away with it a little bit more, maybe once a session if you're playing against stone random people. But again, you have to know your opponent is aware of common tells. You have to know your opponent does not think you are a good, strong, world-class thinking player. And your opponent has to really be paying attention. All these things very rarely line up perfectly, which results in you not being able to make these plays all that often. So be careful with reverse tells. They can get you in a lot of trouble. Reverse tells very often just become very reliable tells for you, where you breathe heavy, or let's say you blink a lot. You think blinking is weakness because you saw Tom Dwan playing on TV and he was blinking a lot the few times he was bluffing. Therefore, you're going to blink every time you have the nuts. Fine. You blink every time you have the nuts, well, now you're just easy to play against, right? I will say, blinking is usually a pretty decent sign. Like uncontrollable blinking, it's hard to know if it's uncontrollable or controllable, but blinking is actually an interesting one, especially if you're at a TV table because the lights are shining right in your eyes. It's kind of hard to control it. I know I've experienced the exact same thing that I saw Tom Dwan happen to him on like high stakes poker, where he was blinking a lot when he had bluffed like 2 or 3 times in a row. It's hard. It's hard. Your eyes dry out, I guess. But anyway, reverse tells become reliable tells, and then you're in a pickle. Michelle says, on average, when we're talking about player pool tendencies, are players better at hand reading? Do rivers bluffs less work? Oh my God, it's a tongue twister. Do river bluffs work less often on PokerStars compared to the other sites? Because people on PokerStars are better. People on PokerStars are better, and therefore exploitative plays in general will work a little bit less. However, the vast majority of my data, well, all of my data, has come from sites where you can track the data. And most of the volume is on PokerStars. So all of my data, actually I'll tell you all the data, has come from PokerStars. And if it's working on PokerStars, it's going to work on the other sites as well for the most part. River betting is good. A lot of people like to think, oh, it doesn't work in my games. Also, a lot of people like to think, well, my bluff failed a lot, so it must be bad. But realize if your bluffs need to work 35% of the time, it's only 35% of the time, right? Humans are very, very bad at reconciling the idea that something can happen infrequently and still be profitable. They think it has to happen every time. It's like when you make that, 1.5x river bet, needs to succeed 60%, right? Is that right? Yeah, it needs to succeed 60%. And in reality, it may succeed 67%. So you're printing equity. You're literally printing. I think you print half of whatever that difference is. So you're printing 3.5% of the pot. Whatever the pot is, say it's $100, you're printing 3.5% of that. You're printing $3.50 with that bet every single time, which is actually a lot. But it's going to fail sometimes. When it fails, you lose a whole load. And a lot of people feel bad about that. And you have to get your feelings out of there. You have to get the short-term results-oriented thinking out of there. Because at the end of the day, if a play is profitable, it's profitable. Do it over and over and over again. Now, obviously, compared to the other plays, maybe additional plays are more profitable. However, in all of my scenarios yesterday, when we checked, we had to presume that I lost the pot. So if when it goes check, check, I lose every time, well, those plays are going to be neutral because I'm checking and I'm just losing the pot. But if we can make $3.50 every time instead, I'd rather make $3.50 every time instead of not making $3.50 every time in exchange for variance. In exchange for variance, if you're good, you use data, you get rewarded and you make money. So would you rather make money with additional variance? Usually the answer is sure, assuming you're properly bankrolled.